Good evening.
Aloha.
Aloha. There is a point that you find the world itself, the world of men and women, do not grasp, and which, if our students do not grasp, is going to account for years and years of frustration, of delay in the demonstration of harmony that they expect to make through their studies. Probably it is because we have misinterpreted Scripture so badly that we lack the ability to come out of the mesmerism that religion has thrown us into. I'm going to illustrate that with 2 points that came up on this recent trip, on this latest trip. The speaker opening this international conference in Holland quoted a passage from St. Augustine, in which he said that God cares for everything, every bird, every person, everything in the world. And I knew that if that statement were allowed to stand, that I would have no contribution whatsoever to make to that meeting, because what I had to say would be a contradiction of that statement, the way the statement reads and is usually understood. And so I started right off when I was introduced to say that while the statement of St. Augustine was true probably from the standpoint from which he said it, it was definitely not true from the way the world interprets it. In other words, if there is anybody at all that still believes that God concerns himself with this human world, they are certainly shutting their eyes to the wars, to the diseases, to man's inhumanity to man that is witnessed in every part of the globe, the cruelties, not merely that are inflicted upon animals or birds, but the cruelties that are inflicted on man and by cruel systems of government. If anyone for a moment believes that God is caring for those who are so badly wounded and mangled at war or on the high roads of our nation, they must certainly have a strange idea of what care means. If the infinite way has revealed anything to me at all, it is that there is no God in the human scene, and that a human being is as stupid to rely on God as he would be to rely on a six-pointed star, a crucifix, or a sword, and whatnot. I called attention to the fact in this same talk that a man who in his field of medicine is one of America's great names, and to whom if we would go and say, I have discovered a cure for cancer, won't you try it out? Try it on 100,000 cases and tell me if I haven't got a good cure for cancer. And then if he and his associates tried it out and 15 cases were healed out of the 100,000, I'm sure that that man would come back and say, you haven't got a cure. I know 15 cases were healed, but I don't understand how they were healed, but certainly not by your medicine, because there's 99,985 who didn't get healed. And that's the story. But this man, imbued with religious enthusiasm, goes to Lourdes and he witnesses 100,000 people go to the shrine, all of them praying to the same God, the same prayers, the same shrine, probably with equal desire to be healed. And out of this 100,000 who go there, 15 of them were healed. And then this man writes a book to show that those 15 healings proved that God heals disease. To him, the 99,985, he was blind to those. What happened to those were of no importance to him. 15 people were healed, and that proved that God healed disease, and that's utter nonsense. That isn't the way God would work. To heal 15 people and leave these others unhealed, all praying equally? No. No, when you have witnessed not only what I've witnessed in my 50 years of travel, but what anyone can witness by going to a public library and reading history. You have to acknowledge that God was very absent from this scene, and still is. Then you find, first of all, that this does not destroy your faith in God. Nothing can do that, because there doesn't live on this earth an individual, even among those who call themselves atheists, there doesn't live one single individual who inside of his own being doesn't know that there is a God, that doesn't know that there is a creative principle of this universe, that it did not create itself, and that it cannot accidentally keep roses coming from rose bushes forever. It cannot accidentally keep the tides in their place forever, or the sun and moon and stars in their courses. There must be law, there must be a principle, there must be something that governs as well as creates the universe. And so this does not destroy your faith in God, but it makes you question. Since, looking around at this human scene, we see so little evidence of God, so little evidence of what Jesus said, it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Your heavenly Father knoweth that you have need of these things. We have so little evidence when you look around this world of God knowing humanity's need, and still less of God's good pleasure in giving it, that the question that arises is not, is there a God or isn't there, but how have we missed the way of finding God? How have we missed the way of bringing God into our experience and proving that God can heal disease the same as God healed disease 2,000 years ago, or that men like Jesus and many other mystics saw that it is God's good pleasure to give us the kingdom, saw that God does know our need. So the question then comes, how have we lost our way, and can we get back on the path that will bring God into our experience as a tangible reality? Well, of course, Jesus knew this because he made it very clear that there is something necessary on our part before we can receive, let us call it the grace of God. That is, life lived without taking thought, anxious thought, doubtful thought, concern, worry, fear. Repent, turn ye and live. You cannot add new wine to old bottles. Paul saw it very clearly and taught it in language that is probably easier for us to understand when he made it clear that we must die daily to the old man, that we must put off mortality in order to put on immortality. Both Paul and Jesus left pretty good formulas as to how to attain that, although many of them are called impractical today. But certainly those who live by them do not find them impractical. It is only those who have never tried it who find it impractical. The same people that never drove an automobile that knew it couldn't be done, and those who couldn't fly an airplane knew that couldn't be done. It is always the ones who have never tried it who are so sure that it can't be done. You never find those who have tried it claiming that it can't be done. So, in my experience, which has led to the teachings that are in the Infinite Way writings, the point that clarified itself to me was this, that as long as you continue to live as a human being, that you must reap a human life. And a human life is one of ups and downs, good and bad, sick and well, alive and dead, rich and poor, sometimes one and sometimes the other. That it is only when some form of purification has taken place within us that we can begin to demonstrate the absolute truth, not only that there is a God, but that this God knoweth our needs before we do, and it is his good pleasure, or its, to give us the kingdom, to make our way harmonious. In the Sermon on the Mount, you have these two paths clearly defined. On the one hand, ye have heard it said of old. That's the Old Hebraic law. That is the teaching of all churches today. The Old Hebraic law. Every church lives by the Old Testament. No church accepts the New. all live by the old law of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, and if somebody steals your coat, lock him up and put him in jail. He deserves it. Just be sure he stays there long enough until he'll come out so angry that he'll want to steal two coats. All of human existence today is lived in accord with the Old Testament, the law. And the Master, on the other hand, said, "But I say unto you," and then he gave the Christian way of life. Now it is that Christian way of life that we are told today is impractical and impossible, but which needs only to be tried in order to be proved. Put up thy sword. And here we have one of these first principles that the world denies today. It denies that you can put up your sword. Of course, what it really means is this: the human world can't put up its sword, and of course it can't. How can it when it has nothing greater than the sword to turn to? The world knows only force, physical force, and nowadays they're commencing to learn the power of mental force. This is a rather new experience within this century. Originally, men fought probably with their fists or threw stones at each other. But as soon as the bow and arrow was invented, it was a very easy thing to defeat the people who had only their fists or stones. And when rifles were invented, it was an easy thing to defeat the nations that had only bows and arrows. And so it has been that every invention in the line of physical force has made it possible for the one with the strongest power, the heaviest power, to defeat the one that had the lesser power. And we go all the way through that until we come up to this present moment when we have nuclear fission. And the only sad part is that the enemy has two. And so instead of it being a very simple thing to win our victories by throwing a few more of those bombs, now we have to hold back because the other fellow may throw them too. And so we come to a period of government by fear. We come to a period now when every national and international policy is based on fear. Nothing less. Shall we go into the Middle East? If we don't, we fear the Russians will. If we do, we fear the Russians will do something else. If it isn't the Russians, it's the Chinese, and if it isn't them, it's somebody else. But the point is that all policies in the human world today are being predicated on fear. We do what we fear that we must do, or what we fear not to do. This cannot be changed in the human picture. That is why it is an easy thing, and probably a truthful one, for the human being, knowing of no power but material force, to say, well, there is no other way. Those are the only weapons we have, weapons of force. And therefore, we must have more force than the other fellow. Now, when the Master said, "Put up thy sword," he did not mean put up thy sword so that your enemy can cut your head off. He meant put up your sword because he was teaching that which would destroy the power of material force. In this present century, or late in the last, we saw the beginning of mental sciences. And we saw that the power of mind was actually sufficient to change conditions of body. That the power of mind was actually sufficient to change conditions of living. It was through this that the mind sciences began, even that which is today called the science of right thinking, the power of thought. Through that, the works evolved into the higher realm, where even the power of thought was done away with, and the higher realm was entered of no thought and no power. That's the realm in which we're working in the infinite way. We are not working through the power of the mind. We are not working through the power of right thinking. We are not working through the power of thought. We are working in the realm of no mind, no thought, no power. And that doesn't mean quite what it seems, because it is in the realm of an infinite power, but a power not used by man, not directed by man, not influenced by man. And that, of course, is where the difficulty comes in understanding and applying the principles of the infinite way, because in our first undertaking of this work, we find it absolutely necessary to change our way of thinking. We have to change our way of thinking from believing that there is power in thing or thought to the realization of this X-power, God, Spirit. We have to change our way of thinking from believing that I of my own self can do something physically or mentally, and come into the realization that I of my own self can do nothing. And then not make a liar of myself by trying to do something, but by actually abiding in that consciousness where that which has been called the Father within by the Master, that which was called the Christ by Paul, this that is unknown to the human world comes into active operation. So it is that in our earliest work in this work, it would seem that we are very busy using our mind, and we are. We're using our mind just as we would pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. It is very much like priming the pump. We use our mind because as we read, we become aware of principles that are foreign to us. Those of us who were living under the law of the Old Testament, we find that we are learning about principles of put up thy sword. If the left cheek is struck, turn the right. If our coat is taken, give our vest. We're learning of new principles which are so alien to us that it takes a good bit of mental disciplining before we can even bring ourselves to accept them, much more try to demonstrate them. So there is a stage in our unfoldment when we are very definitely using the mind in order to help us outgrow it. But when we come to the practical living and the demonstration of the infinite way, that is when you come to the place where you put up your sword, not only the physical sword, but the mental sword, and find what this other power is. I told you yesterday of the tremendous change that has come into the world as evidenced by the public statement made by the Church of England, officially over its signature, in which it said, and this was printed in every newspaper in England, Ireland, and Scotland, and Wales, that Christian Science has awakened us to our responsibilities in this age. They only meant one thing by that, because they later explained that they were not agreeing with Christian Science theology. They weren't even agreeing with the Christian Science principles of healing. But they had been awakened to their responsibility of making spiritual power practical in human affairs through healing and through the other activities of daily life. This statement in itself is a world-shattering statement because it completely shattered the old world of theology and opened up a whole new era in which everyone must ask themselves, what are the religious responsibilities in this age? Because it concerns not merely the church, it concerns everyone interested in the subject of living a religious life and yet having it made tangible in one's daily experience. Now, it is very clear in traveling this world that business organizations, medical organizations, church organizations are all opening themselves and inviting into themselves speakers, lecturers, teachers on these subjects. And that means this, that just as there have been transitional periods in history before, like the period when we went from Judaism to Christianity, to the teaching of the Master, periods when we went from the Roman and Greek culture to the European, periods when the Oriental culture was at its very, very zenith, and then dropped, periods such as we had a couple of 100 years ago when man began reaching out for freedom, liberty, and quickly came the English Charter, the French Revolution, the American Revolution. These were periods. These were not isolated instances. These were periods, transitional periods, when men passed from one dispensation to another. So it is that we are right now in the midst of such a transitional period when men are moving out from the era of force to the era of that which transcends the use of force, the period in which the sword is to be sheathed and turned into plowshares. You see, it's a very difficult thing when you're in that period of transition to make it clear. And it is only when you are able either to review the literature of the world, the current literature of the world, or, as in our case, travel this world and speak to the people not only in the level of the workers or the level of the business people, but also the level of universities and the level of governments. And then you'll find that it is literally true that we are in a period of transition, and we are passing from the age of force. It is true that as we pass from physical force, we find ourselves temporarily in a little period of mental force. You had that demonstrated for you last year when this activity of subliminal perception was introduced to the world and proved to be of such tremendous success that the Hollywood moving picture studios and television studios spent over $1 million for new machinery to put this into the new films. And when all of the stories that were being filmed in California were quickly rewritten to put into the script this new activity of subliminal perception, well, of course, you know what happened. Overnight, subliminal perception failed. And from 57% increases in its activity, it dropped to no percent of increases. And it dropped overnight, and it stayed that way, so that the word came out from Wall Street, junked the machinery, changed the stories, and dropped subliminal perception. And then quickly from England came a message from the Advertising Association of Great Britain, which controls the ethics and integrity of their advertising, saying that we agree not to use subliminal perception because of its unmoral nature. And then the Association of Advertisers of the United States quickly followed by issuing a similar statement. And so for the time being, mental power in that direction was outlawed. Before that, we had mental power in the activities of what would call the bad kahunas, those that cursed and destroyed, which was the same activity used by the Aborigine in Australia or the hexers in Pennsylvania. All of this was mental power used for destructive or negative purposes. Here we are now in the age when those things have passed, and the mind is not used for those purposes, and even this mind use in subliminal perception had a quick and beautiful burial. And so this transitional period continues, and it will go right through the era of mental powers into spiritual. Now you'll notice that on every hand, even in international affairs and in these union operations in Michigan, you will notice that the entire attention is being centered on, we will compromise, we'll do anything as long as we're not compelled to do it under force. That's exactly what I'm trying to say to you. That it is being recognized in every walk of life that being compelled to do something or compelling someone else to do something is not the way, and that day is going by the board. It is a way that is fast disappearing from our society. And this is the tail end of that transitional period. It will not be long before you will see more concrete evidence of the day of this spiritual power. And remember this, because unless I bring this down to the practical application in your affairs and mine, I will not have achieved anything for you. You can recognize spiritual power in this way. It is something that you cannot use, and you cannot direct, and you cannot influence. Nobody in this world ever can be permitted to say, I am spiritual, or I can use spiritual power. That can never happen on the face of the globe. The Master, Christ Jesus, said, I of my own self can do nothing, and you will never make a greater demonstration than he did in that regard. You will learn as you come to spiritual power that it is something that is not at the will of man. It is not to be directed by man. It is not to be influenced by man. And you are not bringing spiritual power into your experience until you have brought yourself to that state of purity that enables you to say, I can of my own self do nothing, and then sit in quietness and stillness and confidence until you are taken over and until it influences you, governs you, directs you. When we were back in the days of mental science, a person could sit down and attempt to make any demonstration they wanted. And if they didn't like driving a Ford, they could sit down and try to demonstrate a Cadillac. And if they didn't like their wife, they could sit down and demonstrate a divorce. You heard all of those terms in mental science. In other words, it was predicated on the belief that you tell God what you want and God does it for you. Well, of course, that sets you up as being wiser than God. You know best what is good for you, much better than God does, and you know that that is nonsense. So you know that that could never have been anything more than a temporary step discarding the use of material force and substituting for it a mental force. Now, let it be clear to us that we have no desire and no will to use the power of God, but that our way of life is to live God-governed. And then see what change takes place. The question is asked, what is meant by being in the world but not of it? That's exactly what is meant. We live here in this world. We associate with each other. We eat and drink and sleep and wear the same clothing and need the same automobiles or transportation or aircraft. Everything in our life is just as it is in the life of the other people of the world. And therefore we are in the world. But the difference is we are not of the world because we are not using the world's weapons to attain those. We are not using the world's weapons even to keep those. We are not using the powers of material force. We are not using trickery, deceit. We are not using false advertising. We are not using hidden persuasions. We are not using the weapons of the world. Yet we are enjoying everything that this world has. To be in this world means to have every rightful thing and to have it in abundance with 12 baskets full left over, but not to use the world's weapons in attaining them or retaining them, but to have them in our experience by grace, by this very thing that no one can define. Probably right here we have our first difficulty. Someone would like to know what that power is like, what it looks like or how it feels or how it's going to act, and there is no answer to that, for the simple reason that the human mind can never embrace the knowledge of infinity. The human mind can never embrace that which can never be a part of the human mind. That was why Paul made it clear that the things of God are foolishness with man, even as the things of man are foolishness with God. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if a large part of my mail always has in it that question of, well, what am I supposed to see, or what am I supposed to feel, or what is it like? And there is no answer, because that which brings carnations from these carnation plants forever and forever, we can't know. We don't know. We call it life. We don't any more know the meaning of the word life than we know the meaning of the word God. We don't know any more the meaning of the word God than we know the meaning of the word spirit. There never has been anybody on the face of the globe define such terms. We can know the effects of life. We can know the effects of spirit. We can know the effects of God. But the essence itself is beyond the comprehension of man. And yet, when he is in his highest consciousness, he is aware of it as a presence without being able to define it, analyze it, or really even understand it. The point that I would make with you tonight is this. Do not expect to live with the same human qualities of hate, animosities, jealousies, bigotries. Don't expect to live with the same degree of resentments and other human traits, and at the same time be the recipient of a spiritual grace. That's an impossibility. The only thing that is shutting out the grace of God from this whole world is the human mind and its qualities, those very qualities of the Old Testament that were so noble then. Now, how does one, to be practical, how does one change their nature from that of being a human being with human tendencies and human desires, human anxieties? How does one change that so as to conform more nearly to the Son of God who is heir of God, joint heir to all the heavenly riches? And there is where the New Testament comes in and becomes our guide. In it we are told that it profiteth you nothing to pray for your friends. And that doesn't mean to stop praying for your friends, but it means rather, the next statement is the big one. You, my disciples, must pray for your enemies. I read recently where someone ridiculed that statement on the grounds that we wouldn't be intelligent if we prayed for our enemies to be successful over us. And of course, you know how stupid that was. In praying for your enemies, you don't pray for him to be successful over you or over good. You pray that your enemy may be opened to that very Spirit of God, that the finger of God may touch whatever it is we call our enemy. We pray that their mind may be opened, that their soul may be opened, that something within them may respond. That's the praying we have to do, not only for our enemies, but really it's the highest form of prayer that we can do for our friends. It isn't intelligent to pray that our friends have more health or wealth. It is rather more intelligent to pray that our friends have more of that mind which was also in Christ Jesus. It is a most wonderful form of prayer to pray that our enemies be forgiven their sins. Being careful always not to be desiring that they be punished for them, but that they be forgiven them, because there would be no forgiveness without a change of heart. And where there is forgiveness, there is that change of heart. Actually, taking anxious thought for our supply doesn't increase our supply. On the contrary, it has a way of cutting off our supply. And the more anxiety we have about it, the more we pinch that bat and get nowhere. It is only in the degree that we can release ourselves from that anxiety that the supply that is always present can flow. Yes, but how? And there too, always there is recourse to the four Gospels. And always in those four Gospels is to be found the answer of what we are doing to block our own income and outgo of good. To be in this world but not of it means really and truly to be more reliant on that which is invisible, to enjoy the things of this world while not being attached to them, while not finding them necessary, not finding them the objects of our desires. Not that they're not necessary in our normal course of living, but that our need isn't anxious concern about them. Our need is a release from that anxious thought. Now, see this power, for it is unlike any other power in the world. Electricity you can use. Atomic power you can use. Gas power you can use. The laws of nature you can use. There is only one power that cannot be used by man, and that is why it is not a good power and an evil power. Any power that man can use, he can use for good or he can use for evil. But the power of God cannot be used destructively. And that's because man can't use it. Man can't control it. Man can't influence it. He can't even influence it to act for his own good. He cannot influence it to act for his particular family. God help this world if man could ever control the laws of God or Spirit of God. That would be the day. Now, in that realization, we open ourselves to be used, that it use us, that it express itself in our experience, that it flow in us, to us, from us, that it be realized as a universal grace, not something to be called down to my garden or my business, but that which is realized as a universal grace, a universal presence, a universal power, and that willingness to see everyone on the face of the globe in its embrace. Certainly, in the materialistic state of thought, if one prospers, another must lose. If one gains, another must lose. That is not true in the spiritual realm, where the only measurement is infinity. And so it is that when one benefits, all benefit. When a thing is spiritually conceived, spiritually evolved. It is only when the attempt is made to channel it to me or to channel it to you. That is really the reason why prayer as it is known today can never be effective and never can result in God's grace. Because prayer as it is known today is always a prayer to do something for me, or for mine, or for my allies, or for my soldiers at the front, or for my church, or for my race, or for my religion, or for my state, or for my city, or for my family. And such prayers must always result in failure, because the only one true God is not a God of personal direction, is not a God of personal caring. It is a universal principle which is for all those who can tune into it. Probably one of those things that has helped to hide this from the world so long is the fact that we refer to God as He. And even in India, where there was a higher concept of God than in the Occidental world, they embraced the word she for God. And so it is that both in the Orient and in the Occident, we have been so busy with he and she that we have forgotten that God cannot be a male or a female, and that God cannot be some kind of a glorified human being, which the word he or she would tend to indicate. And so it is that we have gone to God as we would to a he or a she, and then said, "Oh God, visit my household." That word "my" completely blocks off God from anyone attempting to come into God's grace, because there is no such God. Actually, while at first to certain good people it seems a very strange thing that God's grace should be equal to the just and to the unjust, but everyone will someday have to learn that that is true, that in the eyes of God there are no sinners, and in the eyes of God there are no punishments. All of these teachings have been brought in for the control of man, since man was not subject to God. So it is, if you do not know how to bring God into your experience, then of course it may be that you will have to discipline your children by either threatening them with the ghost or the absence of Santa Claus next Christmas or the devil. But once you know the nature of God and how to bring this into your experience, you no longer have to threaten people. You no longer have to bribe them to be good or threaten them in order to make them good, because there is a higher grace that takes hold of them and governs their conduct the same as it governs yours, mine. You see, we go back always to the basic principle that in order to make progress on any spiritual path, you must know the nature of God. You must know what it is you're praying to and why and for what. And if there is a remnant left in you of a belief that you can go to God for some favor for yourself or your family or your friends, then you've left God out of your picture and you are praying amiss. It is only when you transcend the attempt to channel God, to make a tool of God or a servant of God to do your will, that you begin to understand the nature of God, and then you make yourself a servant. Then you make yourself an instrument for God to use. And then you come into the rightness of spiritual living. True, it will be made practical in your experience. It'll be made practical in your business. It'll be made practical in the health of your body. In every way. One of my great happinesses is a letter from the assistant warden of Oahu prison saying that if a few men in this community would do for the prisoners what you have done, there would be no prison problem. I'm happy about that, because the man isn't a student of the infinite way, knows nothing about it, but he has seen the fruitage of what this will do even among the so-called prisoners, criminals. When this nonsense is stopped of trying to pray to God to reform a bad man, and the nature of God is understood and brought into that experience. And so it is that wherever an opportunity is given to reveal the nature of God and the nature of prayer, great fruitage takes place. I told you of my invitation to give a talk in Dartmoor Prison in England, and Dartmoor is the Alcatraz of England. You can't get into Dartmoor until you've been convicted of 5 major crimes. And yet there are 22 men, or were 22 men there 3 months ago, interested in spiritual teachings and studying spiritual teachings. In the present time, they're studying under their own minister, Church of England minister, they're studying the message of the infinite way. You see, this is a practical thing. This is not impractical. This doesn't only work with good people who want to be good. This doesn't only work with healthy people. This works to make the sick healthy. It works to make the bad good. It helps to make the poor less poor, and sometimes affluent. Why? Because those are not the goals. Those are not the objects of our work. Those are not the objects of our prayer. The object of our prayer is open me, make me receptive to this divine influence. Let me know more of that mind which was also in Christ Jesus. Open me to this state of being. And not only open me, open human consciousness, wherever it may be expressed. And then, once we have outgrown the pettiness of being Americans, or being Christians, or being white, or being black, and have risen to the point where we realize our divine sonship and long to take into that fold and see every individual God-governed, that then is when our nature begins to change. That is when our own nature becomes purified and becomes an instrument through which this divine life, the Father within, can find expression. Then we can say, I am God-governed. But we can only say I am God-governed when we are not outlining in our prayers what we want the result of our prayers to be. When we are not trying to influence God in our own behalf or another's. When we are not trying to mold God to our will. When we are not thinking of God as a servant whose function it is to perform something for us. But when we have released ourselves from all of this, in the realization, why, if I'm a child, then the Father must be the governing consciousness, and that I act as a child and learn to receive inwardly the grace, the direction, the prompting, the harmony, the health, the supply, whatever it is that's necessary to be in our lives. But the big thing is, awake. Awake to the realization that you must stop trying to influence God. Stop trying to reach God, and keep yourself down here on earth, opening yourself to let God reach you. That's the message tonight. Thank you.